Hi. So we have Aragorn, Rockpants, and Elizabeth Neal, which is a pretty good start. Let me see if I can just tilt this down so that it's not going to be showing so much dead space above. There we go. And howdy. It feels like it's been a week since I've done this, because it has been. We are live here. Our topic is incorrect. Let's fix that. This is the new GM. We got this as a recommendation from Gilladgood, who's here. Hey there. And honestly, we may have done this before, but it's not like we don't ever repeat ourselves on here. So we're going to we're gonna have a look, because it's probably been quite some time since we've done it. But the original topic was presented to us. If I pull it up here, specifically as can you sometime do a stream on GMing for the first time? Common mistakes, advice, and the like. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a look at what it really is like for somebody just starting out, and what they could do to potentially maximize their chances of success while running role-playing campaigns, but not just their success, but also their own enjoyment. I'm going to throw this right off here with a major disclaimer here, as is everything that we discuss on Clinic Hours. These are opinions, and these are opinions and commentary and answers based on years of experience that I have, but that's my experience, which is not necessarily going to be equal to everyone else's experience, and is absolutely not meant to be definitive fact. I can't do definitive fact. Such a thing just is not in the cards, because I can't. I just can't. There is so much at here which is going to be subjective, that it would be irresponsible of me to assume that I could just go ahead and ignore that many people may have different opinions on how this should be done. So as long as we have that clear, as long as we understand where we are with this and what we can do going forward, then let me explain how this is going to work. If you are just tuning in, if you haven't been to a clinic before, this is kind of like an open space where everybody can weigh in with your questions, weigh in with your comments, weigh in with your own answers to questions that other people are posing. Answer your own questions. I don't care. I'm mostly here just to make sure that we have a good time and we get some good conversation going. Also, if you have questions that aren't necessarily related to the topic, ask them anyway. We will have the chance to get around to them, I am sure. We also, of course, have our mod Aragorn here. I don't believe that we'll have the crosshair today. I think it's a bit too late for him, but we may get Real Rick Wall in here as well. So if you do have things posted up, they will be scanning for comments and loading them in so that we can bring them up on the big screen. I remember my first kind of real attempt at running a game. I mean, there had been times where sort of everyone was like, let's play a game, and I'd be like, okay, and then, start coming up with a scenario. But this is when I was a small child. The first time that I ever actually tried to run a role-playing game specifically as part of a system, that wasn't just some random kind of like quick, fast one-shot that people weren't really all that dedicated in. I remember going home, I created a poster for the game, I posted it in the gaming club at school at CJEP, and waiting for people to come in and sign up. And I got a whole lot of people, because the reality is when you say that you're running a game, it's often you're not going to have a lot of difficulty finding people willing to play, because as is the case, if this is a supply and demand situation, the supply of players is high, the demand for game masters is often higher, and that's totally fine. I mean, there also in most games you have one game master to several players, but I remember setting it up, and I remember thinking at one point, like, how much of this do I really want to prepare? How much of this do I want to have all set out and laid out in notes? A friend of mine showed off his binder that he was very proud of, where he had detailed notes for an entire town's worth of NPCs. And I thought, I don't want to do this. I'm going to try to just see what I can do by the seat of my pants. And I did. And we played a few sessions and we had a great time, and the game collapsed because players ended up being not pleasant to each other, because two of them were in the process of working through a rough spot in their marriage. And so the game kind of fell apart, which I'm totally fine with, because it sort of gave me a step in to the whole experience of running games. And that's actually kind of the first topic that I'm gonna specifically point out to people, that I want people to know, because this is something that I think that a lot of people are worried about, and I want people to know for certain that it is okay for your first game, your second game, your 500th game to screw up, to fail, to collapse. It's fine. The biggest thing that I think that you have to get over when you first start running a game is, what if I don't do it right? What if people don't have fun? What if I don't have fun? What if it's not interesting for people? All of this stuff is completely okay. It's fine. Hey, Kaylin, it's good to see you. It's by its very nature, games end, and a lot of games end on what would people would consider a failure. It doesn't mean, just because a game ended prematurely or just because a game failed doesn't mean that it also wasn't a success, that it also wasn't something that you can build upon. It is important to realize that when you are learning a new skill, and game mastering is a skill, when you are learning a new skill, you cannot be expected to be amazing at it when you start. Perhaps you have a lot of skills that are related to running games. Maybe you write fiction. Maybe you are a public speaker. Maybe you are an improv comedian. Maybe you have a lot of experience just being the leader in your friend group. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed a success right off the bat. And the first step in becoming excellent at something is to try it regardless of whether or not you are any good at it. You're probably going to make a whole lot of mistakes. This is fine. It is something that you're just going to have to get used to. The idea that you cannot be perfect, but no one is. I am a representative of that right here on this channel. I have started campaigns on this channel recently, which I consider a failure. That they didn't go the way that I wanted. They ended up ending early, that I was struggling, and that I wanted people to understand, and I want people to understand that I'm okay with that. And as much as I might worry about failure, as much as I might have, gobs of that old chestnut imposter syndrome, just waiting to make sure that people are nervous about things that they've been doing for a very, very long time. Failure is going to happen, and you cannot let that stop you from taking that first step. If you come away with nothing else from this show, aside from attempt to communicate as best you can, the number one thing I want you to remember is it's okay to fuck up. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for your games to implode spectacularly, because until you actually take that step and try, you are not a game master. But once you do, you are a game master. And now you just have to keep at it, because just like everything else, you will get better with time and practice. And if you never spend that time, and if you never do that practice, you won't really appreciably improve at the skill of game mastering. This isn't to say that everybody needs to be a game master. Not everybody wants to, and not everybody has the opportunity to, and that's okay. I'm definitely not saying that like everybody should have a chance to run a game once, because I don't actually believe that. I know that there are people out there who say you should try something so that you understand what it's like for them, so that then you can be a better insert elsewhere. And I don't actually think that that's so important as just making sure that you step into a game and trying to make sure that everybody has a good time. Oh, let's see this. Okay, so Zesty says, I have a flowchart for imposter syndrome. Are you wearing a mask? No. Then you're the dude/dudette, okay? For a minute there, I'm like, I don't get it, because I thought mask meant something along the lines of like prevention of disease transfer, but now I think I understand. So that just goes to show you where my brain is these days. We've had some questions already posed in our Clinic Hours chat on our Discord. So, hey, thanks for the mask, Kate. Good to see. So why don't we have a look at those questions? We'll see if they kick some stuff off. And don't forget that all of this is ready and waiting for you to chime in with your own experiences and your own opinions. So one of the first questions, I think this one came from Gil Adgood, was how much experience as a player do you need before jumping in, if any? Need? None. You do not need to be a player before you are a game master. I don't even necessarily think that I would recommend it. What I recommend is if you want to run a game, you should run a game. And I don't think that your previous experience has any bearing on whether you should run a game. It is true that if you have experience role-playing, if you have experience as a player, you may end up kind of having a head start. You may end up being a better game master if you know what it's like to be a player. I don't necessarily think the reverse is true, but I do think that, well, at least I don't think that it's so important that everyone should try. But in this particular case, your first time GMing is going to be a challenge, and it is going to be difficult, and you will make mistakes. So it doesn't matter whether you have experience as a player or not. What matters is, do you want to run a game? If you've never played a game, a role-playing game before, but you want to start running one, go for it. It's also much easier these days to do it because you can experience what it's like to be at a role-playing table by watching other people role-play. This used to not really be possible, but now you can do it with a click of a button. You can go on YouTube and so on any number of VODs for streamed tabletop RPGs. You can watch Twitch. They have an entire category, which is right below, where you can watch people game. So if you were really kind of like, I have no idea what it's like to be in a role-playing game, but I want to learn, you can actually learn by watching now if you need to. But I don't think that it's important for you to do that before you start running. I would say, because here's the thing, if you're a first-time GM, this is something that you're just going to have to accept. You're basically jumping into a pool and you're going to be attempting to swim. You're not going to be expected to break an Olympic record right off the bat. So why bother worrying about whether you have enough experience as a player when you have no experience as a GM? That's what kind of matters, is whether you have experience as a GM is going to matter way more than as a player. So I would say, honestly, you don't have to worry about that. Just go ahead and run the game if that's what you want to do. Now, if you are part of a group and everyone's trying to figure out who wants to run the game and you've never role-played before and other people have, you may not be the natural first choice, because it is true that the game kind of uses the GM as an anchor, as a foundation. And if you haven't role-played before, then you won't necessarily be as solid a foundation. But again, this is more about what you want to do. Do you want to role-play? Because if you do, you're all good. Go for it. Make sure that your players understand that, though. So there is that. Which also leads into another question from Gil Adgood, which is, how big of a difference is it to run a game for experienced players versus beginners? Which kind is better for a babby GM? Hey, Requiem. I don't actually... Okay, so there is a big difference between running a game for experienced players or beginners. Which kind is better for a babby GM? again, I don't actually think one is better than the other because there are advantages and disadvantages to each. Experienced players may be kinder to you and may be more likely to be able to give you appropriate tips or pointers based on your the way that you've run the game. So that might actually be better for you, but that also depends on you having players who are not only experienced role players, but also experienced at giving and receiving criticism and who are supportive, which isn't necessarily always the case. Meanwhile, if you have beginner players, they may be supportive and may be able to give you good criticism, but they may not necessarily know as much about what to look out for because they themselves are new. So this is kind of a balancing act, and what I would say is that if you, what's better for a babby GM, find players who are sympathetic and who are willing to work with you to create a great game. Don't try, if at all possible, to run your first game with players who are hard-ass edgelord players who are looking to chew up a game and spit it out, because that's probably not going to be the best environment for you. And that's kind of where I fall on that sort of thing. It is really not a matter of player experience more than it is a matter of finding people who are good at working with you to improve. Now, if all things are equal, I would say that experienced players might be better for your development as a GM, but they may also be harder to please. So what are you looking for? Are you looking to wow your audience? Newer players may be easier to impress. Are you looking to up your game as quickly as possible? Experienced players are more likely to be able to help you. So that's kind of where I would go with it. While Requiem does say, I would also avoid players that have a tendency to derail a campaign. I would say that if you're a new GM, you may not actually know you may not recognize those signs in a player. You may not know that before you actually have a chance to play with them. So that is one thing, is that if you are a player who has played with this player before and you know that they do this kind of thing, maybe be careful with a player like that. But if you don't know, don't stress yourself out. There's no way of accurately detecting this sort of thing without experience. Kaylin asks, as a new GM, would it be more beneficial to use a pre-printed module for your first few games? This is a question that I'm actually going to toss out to the audience. I don't have as good an answer because I have never really run a pre-printed module before. I would say that if you're the sort of person who needs to tell the reason why you want to be a GM is so that you can tell your own story, then don't bother with a pre-printed module. If what's really important for you is that self-expression, then embrace that self-expression. But if what's really important to you is being able to run a game and have a good time, a pre-printed module may offload a bunch of the sort of mental gymnastics that you have to do. When I'm running a game, there's a couple of different things that I have to keep track of. There's the story. I have to make sure that the story continues to make sense. There are the rules. I have to make sure that the rules are fairly adjudicated for the players. I have the players' emotional states. I want to make sure that they're all having a good time. I have my own emotional state. I have to make sure that I'm having a good time. If I'm streaming a game, I have to make sure that the tech is working well, that the audience is happy, and all of these things layered on each other is more and more load on my CPU, on my cerebellum and medulla oblongata and all of that stuff. It's more stuff for me to focus on. And if you have a pre-printed module, you are offloading a lot of that work to other people who are doing it for you. Not only are you offloading work about the story, but you're also offloading work about a lot of the mechanics as well. Good pre-printed modules are going to have rules inserts that go with them. They'll have tables that you won't have to go and check. They will have all the information that you need at your fingertips so that you will have less that you have to start thinking on and worrying about right away. And this may be useful for you because if you're new, you may be more worried about everything, and so therefore a pre-printed module may be the way to go. I would point out that this is also dependent on the idea that your particular game has a pre-printed module that is available to you. Not all of them are. There are games that have only 1 or 2 pre-printed modules available, known as quick starts. Onyx Path and White Wolf are very fond of not publishing full adventures necessarily for all their game lines, but they tend to post one adventure that kind of help ease you into the world and the mechanics as well. Whereas for games like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, there are tons of modules out there that you can use. Just make sure that you're getting the right kind. So that also helps. Cassie Mouse points out, I think it would be much easier for me to start with. I need some sort of metrics to know where I'm going. If that is the sort of thing that is a concern for you, absolutely go for a pre-printed module. And for a pre-printed module, when you are doing that, if you are a new GM, my recommendation, especially if you're working with a game system like Dungeons & Dragons, is to find one that is for lower level players because they tend to have less complicated mechanics. You will have to find players who are willing to play a lower level character. This is something that you're just going to have to work out on your own. It is one of the disadvantages of D&D that low level characters are significantly less interesting to play than higher level characters. Although leveling somebody up from 1 to 20 can be very gratifying, but you sort of have to feel like you're just not all that effective, especially if you're used to playing a higher level character and then you have to go back to playing a lower level character right away. I find that other games with point-buy systems tend to alleviate this somewhat. While you don't have access to all the coolest powers right at the start, you do have a bit more of a feeling of being useful right away. Cassie also points out something that is important, especially if you are a new player. I greatly prefer games with very detailed settings, so I don't have to world build. This is one of those offload things that I'm mentioning here. A game like Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have a very detailed setting right out of the box. You can get settings for them that are more detailed, but there's an awful lot that's kind of like, yep, here's a sandbox, go play in it, and then you just have to struggle to stay afloat. Pre-printed modules and some games that have very rich or detailed settings, or games that are based on existing properties, can be a little easier to run because at least the world is taken care of for you. Are you a big fan of, say, Dresden Files? Well, they have a role-playing game that is set in that universe. So if you are a big fan of Dresden Files and your players are, then that saves an awful lot of work for you because you kind of know what you're getting into right off the bat. If you're playing in a game that's set in modern fantasy or modern horror, then you also have the advantage that you don't necessarily have to build a world because the world is built for you. You'll notice that when I ran Changeling the Streaming, it took place in Montreal. And part of the reason for that is because it's very easy for me to say, okay, this location, and my players knew where it was and could instantly adapt to it because they've seen that location before. They're aware of it. And that can be much easier for a new GM to help. Requiem Lost points out, though, I think if you're an improv storyteller or GM, it might be good to read up a pre-printed module, as it will give you an idea of what kind of difficulty you can throw at your group. Very possible. There is a certain amount of prep that you can do when you're running a game, and pre-printed modules tend to be play tested. If they're good, they tend to be play tested so they have a good difficulty curve. It is not something that I would have thought of, so it's a tip that you can absolutely do. But for me personally, again, if I'm looking to run my own stuff, I tend not to look at pre-printed modules a whole lot because I sort of feel like I want to do it myself. I have access to the Jumpstart for Changeling the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition, and I haven't looked at it. Not because I think that it's a bad product, but because I just don't care. I'd rather run the game the way I want to run it. And while that might go against people who are purists, because if I'm running the game the way I want to run it, I may make changes that they're not thrilled with, I also don't care. Well, I care in that I want people to enjoy themselves, but I also prioritize my own fun and my own enjoyment. And part of what I get out of a game is my creative expression, my ability to factor in the changes in the universe. So there is that. Now, reading up on ready-made characters, looking at that, like I have glanced at those and I think those can be useful. Basically, do the prep that you think is important for you. Thank you, Kung Fu Fenris, and I'm glad that you're here. That is important to me, because you are cool. You are awesome. But yeah, for pre-printed modules, you're asking the wrong dude, perhaps in a way, because again, I just don't have all that much interest in them, and I don't have that much experience with them. Real Brick Wall saying that world building is favorite part of GMing. First, hey, Real Brick Wall, it's good to see. But yeah, it's if that is something that is part of what you get out of running a game, don't take that away from yourself, because what's probably the most important thing for you after actually agreeing to start is for you to focus on making sure that you have fun. Because if you're not having fun, there's no point. You can be worried, you can be anxious, but stress can help you. Stress is what pushes us further. As much as we try to lower our stress levels in life, some stress is necessary, because stress is the kind of thing that kicks us out of bed, forces us to eat, makes us actually do things in our lives. Stress does give us positive things. It's just an excess of stress that's bad. But so Requiem asks, and I'll address this now, it hasn't been brought up yet. Might have already been asked, but would you say it is better to run a story-heavy campaign or a more dungeon delve campaign? As in a combat-heavy one. And this is also going to dovetail into a question that was asked by Lemon Eater, which I'm holding on to for a little bit. The answer is, it is better to run the kind of campaign that you would want to play. What do you want to see? Because as much as I might say, oh, you know, like if you're not used to the rules, maybe you don't want to run a dungeon crawl right now because that involves more rule adjudication and stuff like that. But if that's what you're interested in, you should do it. Even if, remember, even if you are not good at something, you actually have to try to do it before you will get better at it. So it is not enough for me to say, avoid things that are difficult for now. I would say do the things that you want to do, and then you will learn as you go. You will get that opportunity. Now, if you're playing in a game like D&D, don't start your players off on level 18. It will be more complicated, but definitely start running a dungeon crawl if that's the kind of game that you really like to run. So no, I don't actually have a preference as to which one is better to run, because a lot of that depends on what you want to play. Because also, what if you don't like dungeon crawls? I'm not going to tell you to run a dungeon crawl if you're not a fan of playing in those things. So Aravana says something, and I think this is kind of important. So I'm going to call it out here. I am a shite DM when it comes to be adaptable. I need those pre-written scenarios if I'm going to run. It's one reason I only run an organized play. If you know that you need a pre-written scenario, use them. And there is no shame in that. I don't want there to ever be anybody to feel ashamed of it, because in reality, what you are trying to do is make sure that people have a good time, that people have fun. However you do that is up to you. And however you do that is part of your fun as well. I can't look down on pre-written scenarios. I watch television, I see movies, I read books, and all of those are essentially pre-written things by somebody else that I am appreciating and enjoying. I just don't like to do that in my role-playing, but other people do. There is nothing wrong with enjoying those things. So it is important to remember that that it's okay to do something that somebody else doesn't do. If you're worried that like, oh, I want to have those sessions where nobody rolls dice because I think that means they're really heavy into the role playing, that's great, go for it. But it doesn't make you a better GM if they don't happen, or if they do happen. If you're the kind of GM who really wants to run a whole lot of combat encounters, and then you decide to run those games and you think like, oh, but they're not role playing as heavy as I want them to, and I would really prefer that they do that. Okay. But that doesn't make you worse or better. Worse or better are metrics that you're going to have to define for yourself. So, and I think that's going to lead me into, this is going to lead me into this. So this was a question by Lemon Eater. What if you just like running combat and never really learn the rules, asking for a friend? Okay, so this is kind of a trickier question to answer because my first reaction is play what you want to play, right? If you don't like running combat, play a system where your combat isn't something that you have to run. If you don't really know the rules, play a setting which is very rules light. These are all possible, but maybe that's not what your intention is. Maybe your intention is to say, I want to play D&D, but I dislike running combat and I don't know the rules of D&D that well. Well, it's going to depend a little bit on your player base, but one of the things that I will say is that one of the roles of a GM, one of the roles of a storyteller or a DM or whatever you want to call them, is to be the adjudicator of the rules. The adjudicator of the rules doesn't necessarily mean that you're the person who knows the rules the best at the table. It does mean, however, that you are the one to make the call. And if you're signing up to be a soccer referee or a hockey referee or a baseball umpire or a tennis judge or any of those things, and you don't know the rules, you're going to have a more difficult time. If you're the kind of person who doesn't want to read rule books and who doesn't want to know the rules or wants to have other people be the ones to basically adjudicate the rules for them, but you are wanting to play in a system where the rules are important, I would argue that perhaps the role of Game Master isn't for you. The way that most games run and the way that most Game Masters do things, the Game Master is the referee as well as kind of the person guiding the story. And it can be difficult or confusing for a campaign if somebody else is running combat and then you're like, I'm only going to step in when necessary. So I would argue that find the system that is better for you and your style of play. That's totally fine. And there are plenty of role-playing games out there that have no combat or very little combat. Or if they do have combat, they have such incredibly light rules that you don't have to worry about it. But don't start saying, I'm going to run a game, but I don't want to learn the rules, and I don't want to run a rules light game. That's unfair. That's essentially abdicating your responsibilities. While it is possible that you could have another player adjudicate the rules and all that, I don't recommend it, and I don't think it's a great idea. Thanks, Roll Brick Wall. It's easy to find a freeform version of role-playing that you can do instead. If you have your heart set on a system, you learn the system. It isn't actually something that you have to have memorized backwards and forwards. I can prove... Oh, no, it's okay. It's behind my screen, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. But there are pages and pages and pages of books for role-playing games. I own many in hard copy. I own even more in digital copies. I actually transferred most of my library to digital when I started moving around a lot because it just became too much for me to carry around. And I don't have all these rules memorized. I can't. Or rather, I won't. Actually is honestly that's the better way to describe it. I refuse to memorize all these rules, partially because I don't have the time, partially because I don't take as much joy in memorizing rules as I once did, and partially because I recognize that that ultimately it is not going to improve my game experience. It's okay to be able to check rules in the middle of a game. It's okay to ask players about a rule if you don't remember it and they do. Or just stream your games and have your audience shout the rules at you anyway because they won't let anything go. That's a joke for people who will immediately start feeling their hackles raising. It is okay to not necessarily know all the rules, but you should have a good idea of how the system runs. You should have an idea of what goes into the major systems in that game. It is important because you're the one who's forming the foundation for the game. And if it's not something that you're willing to put in, then maybe the role of GM is not for you. Again, that's fine. Not everybody needs or wants to be a GM, and that's totally okay. But I definitely would say that it's dangerous to say that you want to be a game master and you want to play in a system where the rules are beyond your level of comprehension or interest. That is not a great idea. Two things to point out for this as well. The first is, if you dislike running combat, ask yourself why. Is it because you don't think you'll be any good at it? Guess what? You probably won't be right off the bat. You actually have to go ahead and do it. Oftentimes when people say that they don't know the rules and they don't know combat and therefore they can't run a game, are ignoring the fact that everybody has to start sometime. Take the time. Read things. Find tutorials online. Ask your friends to help you. Ask your friendly local neighborhood streamer to give you a pointer or two. But, bite the bullet and go for it. Because the way that you will get better at running combat is by running combat. And it's also totally fine to gather your players and say, hey, before we actually start the campaign proper, can we run through some combat? I just want to see what it's like. I want to make sure that I have my footing. And, well, I'll get the chance to practice. This is okay. This is totally fine. It's something that I do a lot when I'm dealing with a system that I'm either new to or a system that I haven't played in years, or a system that I might be familiar with but that my players aren't. So this is a thing. Elizabeth has a very good point, which I am going to highlight because I think it's very important. Math and stat management is a huge stressor for me, and as such, D&D is never high on my list of games I want to run. Yep, totally fine. There are other games that you can run, and there's other games that anybody can run. If you really don't like something, don't subject yourself to it. If it's because you're worried that you're inexperienced, jump into the deep end of the pool. You'll get used to the water and you'll start swimming. But if you hate to swim, then don't bother. It's fine. There are also tools, like Rock Pants has pointed out, things like Thank Fuck for D&D Beyond. Yeah, there are tools to make it easier. D&D is actually one of those games where a lot of the math is done for you, but you still have to do a whole bunch of math. The trick, though, is that they provide basically all the formulas that you need in order to generate balanced encounters. But if you don't like working out formulas, then D&D is absolutely not for you. Games that are a bit more nebulous, like World of Darkness games or storyteller system games, don't do that. And so therefore the combat is a lot more nebulous and takes a bit of a defter hand to make sure that you've presented an adequate and appropriate challenge. But it's a lot more intuitive than having to just sit down and do math. So it might appeal to certain players more than others. Requiem Lost says, as one person once told me, we all start from the bottom of the ladder. You got to be willing to climb to get better. And this is true to a certain extent. If you are also if you want to run a game, but you have no experience in the rules, try playing it. That is one way to learn without the pressure of also being the GM. So that helps. Requiem also a little while ago said, in my experience, so long as you know the rules for some of the more common aspects of the game, then you are all right. For example, in most Exalted games, if you are confident of the combat and social rules, you are pretty okay. For Exalted, there's entire sections of the rules that I just don't bother reading unless a player decides that they want to interact with it. Things like sorcery. If none of the players are sorcerers, and I choose not to put sorcery in the game, I don't need to pay any attention to it. If none of the players are all that interested in naval combat, I don't have to worry about naval combat. So these are things to just hold on to as something that we just don't have to worry about too much all the time. Not something that I would really panic over. So Cassie Mouse says, I really like Exalted, but I wish they gave me the math so I can build challenge with some knowledge rather than blindly. Unfortunately, this is all storyteller system games. They do not present you with the math. They just don't. Very occasionally they'll come up with ways to sort of sneak that in for you, but it is an issue. And it is one of the weaknesses of that game system, but also one of its strengths. That's part of the reason why playing a first level character can be really kind of down for players of D&D, because the system is designed to make it very easy to know what somebody's power level is if they are first level. It's very hard to know what somebody's power level is for a starting character in a storyteller system game, because it uses a point buy system. So how do you build an encounter for 3 people who decided to take melee 1 and 2 versus a group where everybody took at least melee 4 or 5? Very easy to do at character creation, completely within the rules. But the ability of these 2 groups to navigate a combat encounter is going to be very different. And then take them into a social encounter instead. And how does that change? Unfortunately, with a point buy system, it's very difficult for you to come up with that stuff. So a lot of that is intuitive, and that makes these things in some ways more difficult to run. So we do have that to hold on to as well. Let's see. What do we have here? So another question that came up, I believe this was Gil Edgood again. What can you do when the game takes a turn you're in no way prepared for? Players not going for the main plot hooks, unexpected turns like selling the artifact they needed for a night of boozing as an example, and the like. So this is a general GM topic. What do you do when your players decide not to follow the adventure that you've laid out for them? Do you railroad them? Do you tell them that they've done something incorrect and retcon the whole thing? Do you force things on them? Do you roll with it and then go where they want to go? There isn't a clear answer for this. But the one thing that I can tell you is that if you find that you're suddenly in over your head, one of your best options is to tell your players that you're in over your head. Whoa, you did this? Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that at all. I'm just going to need a moment to figure this out. Or maybe we have to end the session so that I can sort things out here. Or maybe I just have to tell you that, like, what you're doing here doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and maybe we should rethink it. Some of it is going to depend on whether you have experienced players or not. But that your best bet in that case is to be open with your players about your struggle if you are worried that you cannot recover from something like that. But this is something that all GMs have to deal with, that all GMs struggle with all the time. GMs who do a lot of preparation, who come up with, miniatures and build little sets for these combat encounters, and then the players decide not to do them. This happens all the time. Even to GMs who are incredibly experienced and popular, they have to deal with this sort of thing. So this isn't really a new question. The new part of the question is that if you are not yet used to having these curveballs thrown at you, to let your players know and ask for their support as you handle a curveball. Because the best way to get better at curveballs is to get a whole bunch of curveballs pitched at you and to learn from experience. One of the unfortunate pieces of advice that I would have to give to people, which I've sort of said from the beginning, but we're gonna make it very explicit here, is that your best teacher is going to be your own experience, which means I cannot give you enough tips so that you can have a guaranteed successful outing for your first GM experience. I can't, because it's not possible. We often have to learn by experience, by doing, and as a result, it's not going to be useful for me to give you advanced tips on dealing with curveballs, because you may not even recognize a curveball until it's right on top of you. I can tell you that players in general do not like to be fucked with where it feels unfair, but players will be sympathetic if you reach out to them as a person and say, this is something that I was not expecting. Oh, hold on. We're actually going to put that back into the queue because that's a new question and this is a response to the previous thing. So we'll get back to that, Kung Fu Fenris. I find it helps to tell my players what kind of threats they might encounter in the early game. For example, I like to tell my players in terms of combat, try to build your character to take on a blood ape, sort of thing. Absolutely, if that's the kind of thing that you want to do. Depending on your GM style, you may not know what kind of threats your players are going to encounter. But this is a tip that is for new players, and anything that you're doing to help a new player is also going to help you as a new GM. So guide your new players along and they will be less likely to be panicked. And if your players aren't panicked, that's one less thing for you to have to worry about. All right, back to what Kung Fu Fenris was saying. How cautious should you be when you're shaking the project that the players built? It can feel pretty hard to be antagonistic towards your players when they invest in something. This is why I would reach out to them out of game if you are truly stumped. Because if your players have worked really hard towards something and you realize that it's incompatible with what you were planning, if you just railroad them into it working, then they're going to be miserable. Most likely. If you roll over and say everything that you do works and now my story is completely kaput and I have nothing else for you, then you're not going to be happy, and then very rapidly they will not be happy. So this is the kind of thing that you are going to have to struggle with, that you're going to have to get the experience of encountering this issue. But if you tell somebody, instead of saying, I'm going to screw with the game, if you then tell your players, this is the situation that I'm in and I need help, they're more likely to look at it from your perspective and to try to figure out a way to make your time at the table better, as opposed to being focused purely on themselves. While also, if you ask them for assistance, then this might be a way for them to say, okay, well now I can not only give advice, but I can give advice that will then further ensure that I am going to get what I want out of the game. So in this way, I would absolutely recommend, basically use your word hole. I would absolutely recommend just immersion is not nearly as important as what everybody says it is, especially if you're a new GM. Immersion is the kind of thing that's way more popular to deal with in live action play or long form play where sessions last for a very, very long time, or convention play. But if you're sitting down at a tabletop as your first GM experience, which is what most people are going to be doing, or remember, virtual tabletops are still tabletops, then, break that fourth wall. It's all right. It'll be fine. Just let them know, hey, I am in a little bit of trouble and I need some help because you've done something that I totally didn't expect. And I'm not even sure that that's the kind of game that I want to run. And then they may suggest, okay, well then let's retcon what just happened. Or they might say, okay, well we did this, but you can take a break and figure out what to do next. Or they can say, okay, but this is why I did what I did, and therefore gives you more insight as to how you can go things further. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with just getting the experience, but being open about your being new. So Soul Search 55, I'm getting strange errors on featured chat right now, which is kind of annoying. It's assuming that some things are being moderated when they're not. But here, I can just copy and paste it in because I have the power. So this is actually from Soul Search. It'll look like it's coming from RPGClinic, but it isn't. If I can get over my fear of GMing, this chat stream would be for me. I have a feeling I have people who would trust me to GM a game even when I've never done it before, but I feel like I would fall into the camp of wanting to please everyone all the time, which might make me nervous if anyone has a complaint, as I'd be concerned I'm not doing a good job. So, I said this right kind of at the beginning of the stream, but it's worth revisiting. You're going to screw up, and if your players expect a perfect game, they will be disappointed. But then again, if you're somebody who has decades of experience running games and your players are expecting a perfect game, they will be disappointed. You are going to mess up because everybody does. And it isn't fair to yourself to say, I shouldn't try something because I might not be good at it. What if the first time, I mean, if you looked at a skateboard and said, well, I'm never going to skateboard because the instant I step on that thing, I'm going to fall, then, I mean, you are correct. You will never fall off a skateboard if you never get onto a skateboard. You will never fail at GMing if you never GM a game. But you kind of, as sympathetic as I am to the fear of starting a game, and I think that that's completely legitimate, the best way to actually get better at GMing is to do it. And I would point out that what you might consider a failure is not going to be as big a deal as you think it is. Look, when we were running Star Wars Reach on this channel, I've said this before, I was experiencing huge amounts of anxiety. I was losing sleep over it. I was worried that not only was I letting myself down, I was letting my players down, I was letting the audience down, I was letting the pantheon of gaming down. Then the concept of like I was just completely wrecked over all of it. And my players don't hate me. They came right back for the next game, and I'm sure that there was some disappointment about how that game didn't work out the way that we liked. Some of them may have wanted to play in that game longer or not. The audience, some of them may have wished we continued to play Star Wars. Some of them may be very happy that we stopped. We may have lost some audience to it, but in the end, it's fine. Running a game is difficult in a lot of ways, and you will not be perfect, and that's okay. But if you are the sort of person who can't stand ever being a failure or having that struggle, then I would say that this isn't for you. But I would say that you're more likely to be better off examining your own self and try to sort of look into yourself and see what you can do perhaps to improve that drive to be able to experience something new. Because it would be an awful shame if you only ever did things because you had a reasonable assurance of success. Kofu Fenders, we didn't lose overall audience numbers, but there are some people who were watching Star Wars who did not come back for Exalted, and that's okay. But we have people who, after we stopped playing Changeling, didn't come back. We have people who, after we stopped playing Exalted the first time, didn't come back. Our audience changes, it fluctuates. And one of the things that we also at RPG Clinic don't care about that much as we care about audience numbers and we want to do better, none of us are so invested in our audience numbers that we're willing to do things like take some of the money that we've earned from your very generous subscriptions and donations and put it towards marketing. We just don't care enough for that. We're not trying to make this a business. We're trying to enjoy a hobby and enjoy it with other people because at heart we enjoy streaming. We are performers, and we aren't, but as much as I would be worried if, hey, we used to get X number of people in our streams and now we're only getting 0.5X, that is something that I would care about. But I'm not worried about individuals coming and going. We've had people who are long-standing members of the community who have fallen away from the community and then come back. And we have had people who have been long-standing members of the community who have decided to go their own way and not come back. And as sorry as we are to see them go, we're not going to be too wrecked about it. We can't be. Some people leave because they just simply don't have the time. They have to focus on their own stuff and their own lives, and I think that that's totally fine. Some people leave because they have made personal decisions that are incompatible with watching streams. Maybe they're like, I shouldn't be watching streams anymore. Totally fine. Maybe they just hate me and something that I've said, and I have to be okay with that too. I have been a professional performer for my adult life, for the majority of my adult life at this point. And I cannot please everybody, and I can't get too emotionally wrapped up in pleasing everyone. So that kind of goes back to something that SoulSearch said before. You just can't get that wrapped up in that in everyone else's. The point is, you want everybody to have a good time. You do your best, but you can't get emotionally invested in everyone else's enjoyment, because some people will not enjoy things no matter what you do. Some people will not enjoy things by sheer chance. You know, if I remember at one point I was in an in-comedy club. I was like an in-house comedy club improv performer. We would perform several times a week. We never really made that much money, but we did, I basically was in shows multiple times a week. And I remember once a friend of mine came and looked absolutely miserable through the entire show and ghosted me at the end of the show. And I was like, fuck, she really didn't like the show. She hated it. That sucked. And then the next day, she called me and said that she was really sorry. The reason why she ghosted me after the show, and I presume why she looked miserable throughout the whole thing, was because she had broken up with her boyfriend that day. Now, their relationship had been going on for like, a month, so it wasn't a huge tragedy, but it was enough to put her in a bad mood, and she just didn't want to talk to anybody because she didn't want me to ask about him. And she was too busy thinking about him to enjoy the show. So there are times where you're going to run the best game of your life and your player just isn't going to be in there for you because they have other shit going on in their lives. So that is a thing. Requiem has a story from first time GMing. Group came up to a boss fight and they were in line to kill the boss on the first time. I admitted to the players I thought this boss would be harder, so I didn't want to throw the mobs as well. And they all said, it's fine, toss in the mobs, it's cool. Players are very reasonable and understanding when you give them the chance to be. We as humans tend to be way more understanding when we can relate to the person we're talking to on an emotional level. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I personally have an emotional appeal to make to you, you're more likely to want to help them than somebody who is sort of puts themselves in a high and mighty position, right? It's one of the things that I don't like about GMing, the deifying of a game master. If you put your GM up on a pedestal and that GM encourages that pedestal, then once they fuck up, well, it's an awfully far way to fall from that pedestal if it's been erected so high. So that's kind of important, is to be able to maintain that emotional connection with others so that if you do screw up or if you do need their help, they feel that you are accessible and that it's possible. So there is that as well. SoulSearch mentions, I hear you there, John. I do find when I leap into something new without thinking about it too much, I'm surprised later how brave I was about it, or actually how easy it was to jump that threshold. But when I focus on how nervous I am, I psych myself out. I have to work on the overthinking. Thank you for your thoughtful response. Yep. Overthinking is a problem. It'll get you into trouble. It's gotten me into trouble plenty of times. I do not have the best answer for you there, other than just give it a shot. Because the other thing is, the worst that can happen, the absolute worst that can happen if you're trying to run a game, is you start running a game, and because everyone is so enthralled with your amazing GM skills, they fail to notice that the building is on fire around you and all of you perish. And the nuclear missiles that are underneath the building that you're in get affected somehow by the fire, and the fail-safes fail, and the entire planet is vaporized in nuclear war. That's the worst thing that can happen. But reasonably, what's the worst thing that can happen is you run the game, you don't have fun, your players don't have fun, and you're out one evening and a bunch of prep. Not a great feeling, but it's not going to kill you. And it's not going to kill your players either. And if your friendships with your players can't survive one game that didn't go so well, then they probably weren't great friendships to begin with. So So think about it in terms of risk reward. Your reward could be that you will develop into an amazing game master who will provide hours upon hours upon hours of entertainment and emotional fulfillment for your friends for years to come. Or you might fuck up and have 1 or 2 nights that you've completely wasted and a bunch of reading. I don't really personally think that that's a hard decision to make. The trade-off can be worth it. But again, it's a trade-off that you have to decide for yourself. And I'm not going to judge you if you know that you're going to be miserable or way too nervous. That's okay. It's totally fine. Kaylin, you did drift away and come back, but like, again, always fine. Totally fine. Not a problem. There are plenty of communities that I've done that to as well. And there's also things like one of my open secrets is I don't really enjoy watching other people roleplay. If I do, I tend to start overanalyzing it. I tend to start trying to pick it apart. Like, how could I improve my own streams by learning from other people's mistakes? And I'm like, that's not really a fun thing to do a lot of the time, so I don't bother doing it. If I was trying to make it a job, then I would force myself to watch more streamed role-playing. And if I'm watching friends, then I don't really want to judge my friends' streams in that way. I don't do this on purpose. It's just kind of the way that I am, because I don't tend to enjoy watching other people role play. I tend to, if I'm watching other people role play, I just wish that I was role playing myself. So, this is not to say that I don't want to support other people role playing or that I can't enjoy watching people role play. I just often when I do, I lurk. I tend to also not speak up too much. Ever since somebody was like, I saw that you were in my stream and then I got nervous, and I'm like, okay, well then I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But, Rock Pants saying preferring to play sports than to spectate. Completely, right? Like, I don't really like watching basketball that much, but give me a ball and a hoop and I'll toss the ball up there and see if I can sink a few baskets. Like, that's fun for me, but I'm just not that into watching watching basketball. Hockey, on the other hand, for the most part, I'd rather be watching it. I'm not a terribly good skater and I can't afford the equipment. So there is that. It's whenever you're in my streams, I don't feel nervous. I feel energized. Well, Sklardicus, that's because you are an exceptional person among the rabble. Soul Search, if you do end up trying it, please let us know, and let us know if you are so good that the building burned down. So that also helps. But look, there are different people who enjoy different things. Just because I probably wouldn't want, like, I also don't watch my own games. I don't go back and rewatch my games. If I do, it's because I have to. I typically don't, because I don't like watching myself perform. I don't like watching things because then I start analyzing my own game, and I shouldn't. But so that's fine. It's totally okay. Burning down buildings is pretty mean. Cassie Mouse, truer words have rarely been spoken. But yeah, so it's so going back to the original comment from before, I have screwed up, and maybe I lost audience along the way, and that's okay. I just have to be all right with it. So when you're a new GM, you might run a game, and then you might have 2 of your players say that they had an amazing time, and 2 of your players say that it sucked and they never want to play again. But as much as you can be disappointed that you didn't appeal to everybody, take the win. And the win, no matter what, is I got experience. I tried something new. You step on a skateboard for the first time and you fall over. Well, okay, but maybe you won't fall over the second time you step on the skateboard, or the third or the fourth. And then who knows, down the road, maybe you're pulling 1080s off a half pipe. So it's It is a possibility. Burning down the house. Okay, so a couple of other things that I can tell you. Yeah, you also have 2 players at that point, which is great. A couple of other things that I can tell you. If you are new to role-playing, watch out for the following things. This is also something that I would say is quite important. So please bear this in mind. Try not to imitate, but be inspired. This is touching on what some people have dubbed the Mercer effect. Matt Mercer himself hates the Mercer effect. The idea that if you are not playing your game like Matt Mercer, who is a professional voice actor, professional storyteller, and who has an entire crew of people assisting him in his game, then you somehow aren't as good a GM as he is, or that your game isn't even worth playing. Don't do that. Don't imitate him. Don't imitate me. Don't imitate any GM you know, even the ones that you've played with. Be inspired by them. See what they do that you like, and then use that to adjust your behavior. See what they do that you don't like, and then don't do those things or do the opposite. But you are going to find the way for you to run a game. If you try too hard to copy somebody else, you're not going to be focused on finding out how you run games best. You're going to be too focused on how to act like somebody else, which, while that might be very interesting for you, isn't the same thing as actually learning how to GM. You're learning how to imitate, which is different. Put your clippers down. You don't need to be bald, and you definitely don't need to be wearing scrubs to run a game. Kung Fu Fenris pointing out that don't worry, I'm bad enough that you never imitate me. That's fair. That's totally fair. So, do not imitate, be inspired. Also, Requiem. Whoops, I totally just screwed that up. Requiem Lost points out after your 10th session GMing, you get enough experience to level up. So keep that in mind as well. Hang out the black leather jacket. See, I have said that the leather jacket for me, part of that is branding for online, but part of it is also if I put the jacket on, it sort of shows like, yep, here I am as the storyteller. It's an assist for players to enter the magic circle, which I've spoken about before. The idea that you are trying to get your players into the point where they can discard the real world and enter into a fantasy world. The jacket is actually something like that, but it doesn't have to be a jacket for you. It can be anything else. The traditional thing that you'll see in media is like the GM puts on a wizard hat or a robe and been like, okay, well now it's time to run our game. And the pleather jacket, I should point out, it is not real leather. It's over there. It's not something you need to worry about. Learning by imitating is something that's okay, but I guess, okay, so my wording might be a bit too literal. When I say don't imitate, what I mean is do not aspire to be exactly like somebody else if you can help it. It's not going to help you develop your own style. Even if you're imitating somebody to sort of get ahead and then you graduate into your own style, that's great. But don't feel like you have to be a Matt Mercer. You don't. He will tell you that. I'm telling that to you now. You have a jamming jacket as well. It's the one with the Demogorgon across the back. That's super hot. That is so attractive right there. Yeah, I'm having some... Okay, so apparently Aragorn can add things sometimes, but I can't. Feature chat seems to be having just some issues. But yeah, so you can learn by imitating other people, but just don't feel the need to be exactly like somebody. Draw inspiration from them. Something that I will say, which I've said already, but I feel it bears repeating. It is completely okay to suck. It's all right if you're not good. It's fine. If you're playing with players who expect you to be amazing right off the bat, it's not gonna be worth it. So just don't worry about it. It is okay to admit that you need help. If you are playing in a game and you run into a situation and you're not sure what to do, if you're not sure about what the rule is, if you are just nervous and you need your players to know that, tell your players. It seems like you have to, because we've put this in the media so much that a game master is like the guy behind the curtain, and it's unfortunately almost always a male. Doesn't have to be, shouldn't be. You are not separate from the table as much as you might feel that way if you don't want to be. And I would recommend that you not separate yourself too much. It is completely okay to ask your players for assistance, or even to just let them know that there's just something that they need to be aware of. So that helps. Lord Wesley asks, is it okay? Does it count if I basically want to be one of your characters in real life? Ask for Sir Zarin wannabe friend. Like I said, in that case, you're drawing inspiration, so that's totally fine. Avoid straight up copying is what I'm gathering from Rock Pants. Yeah, I would say avoiding straight up copying is generally a good idea. What I would say is do not be disappointed if you cannot be a straight up copy, because you in all likelihood will not be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to copy Matt Mercer if I wanted to. And I don't need to, and neither should you. If you say like, oh, Matt Mercer does this thing that I really like, so I'm going to do that too, great, that's fine. But do not beat yourself up if you cannot replicate his style perfectly. It's okay. So Dio points out something which I think is really cool in my opinion, which is gone for me, so I'll have to hope that somebody else can bring it up. Lord Wesley saying a DM is a player with a different role in the game. Yeah, you are a player. You are not a PC, but you are a player. So it is something to hold on to. You can't find a rooftop with the right wind. I've looked forever. It's just not there. It's just not worth trying. There we go. So Dio says, I'm not brave enough to storytell in a live game, but I stepped up to run a play-by-post werewolf game and I'm kind of digging it. So that's another thing that you can do. You don't want to do it face-to-face with a bunch of people at a table? Don't. There are other ways to run games, and online is one of the great ways of doing it. And a play-by-post game is a great way of doing it because it gives you the time that you need to respond. People aren't expecting the game to be run in real time, so that gives you an out. It helps, and that sort of helps out. So there is that as well. So Requiem says, honestly, my only crime when feature chat, like, I love you, but when you don't work, you just hurt. You hurt. You hurt so much. So either way, Requiem says, my only crime when watching streams is when I see a story arc that I like, I will play with it a bit and see if I can make it my own. Yeah, go for it. Do it. It's great. It's a great thing to do. Copying stories is something that everybody does. Everybody steals. Try to file the serial numbers off it enough so that people can't link it back to its original source. But yeah, that's fine. Just, obviously, if you're going to be stealing something for your own personal game, that's great. If you're going to be trying to steal somebody else's plot points and then publish it into a novel that you're going to make, millions of dollars off of, be a little bit careful. So, so yeah, we're just going to keep hitting that refresh button to see if we can get feature chat to work properly. Maybe I'll log out and log back in. Let's try that. Go back into the dashboard. Nope. If you're sending a message and you're waiting for me to post it and I haven't posted it yet, it may be because feature chat is just causing some issues for me right now. It's not because I hate you. Hopefully somebody else can get to it to throw it up there. Here, you know what? I will manually copy and paste this one in because Soul Search did put it in here. So a moment I did muster some personal bravery. I once showed up to a D&D game with people I didn't know in full costume and nobody else did, but it was something people enjoyed. Yep. It's sometimes you'll do something and you will feel like a jerk for trying it. It's natural. But oftentimes it's the ones who dare who get a chance to really do something cool and to get other people to notice them and to do something awesome with it. And they tend to be happier as a result. Dare. It's worth it. We were setting up the next session virtually sometime later, actually recently. And there was a brief mention that I might show up all fancy again. So once again, with even other new people, I showed up in full costume and makeup and even elf ears, and I owned it. Nobody else dressed up, but nobody acted like I was some weirdo either. It was just accepted, enjoyed, and I might make it a thing with this group. See? Like, you stepped out on a limb, you ended up having fun with it, and that's great. And the worst thing that could have happened is you stepped out on a limb, people didn't like the fact that you were in costume, you felt like you were uncomfortable in it, and then you don't have to dress up in a costume again. So yeah, I've had players show up in costume on stream, which I didn't even expect. Kate at one point was putting on makeup for characters, and I never did, and I just thought that was super awesome when she did it. And then when she doesn't do it, I'm also like, that's totally fine. What I find that players will often do in my games is they will come up with outfits that they will wear that aren't necessarily straight up costumes, but representative of their characters that they're playing. You know, things that might be a bit more sort of like, okay, yeah, this makes me feel like my PC when I'm playing. So it is a thing that you can try. Cause bounding, yeah, that's absolutely a way to put it. So thank you for that. That's appreciated. Here's something else. While we're discussing things that things to watch out for if you're a new GM, which I see a lot of them do, is the concept of a GM PC. We have discussed this on the show before. Avoid creating a character just so that you get the chance to play that character in your own game. It's dangerous, and you often are risking pulling the spotlight off the players and putting it on yourself. It is incredibly tempting to be like, well, I've never had the chance to be able to cast Limited Wish before, so I'm going to make an NPC who can do it. Well, then you're more focused on what your NPC can do and not on the story or your players. Remember that as a GM, your first goal is to make sure that everyone at the table is having a good time. If you're focusing only on yourself, you may not be giving your players the opportunity to have that good time. The other thing is that if you create a character and it's like, yeah, this character will just go with the rest of the party and do things with them to shore up maybe a weakness in the party or whatever, well, now you are also playing a PC, and this can be dangerous because, again, you're not supposed to be the focus all the time. You have to let your players be the focus, and the more GM PCs that you introduce, the more you're likely to start pulling focus because you want people to be paying attention to your character. You're the GM. People are already going to be paying attention to your characters all the time. So be worried, be cautious that you're not developing a pet NPC that you start valuing more than the health of the game itself. When I dressed up as Lady Blackbird, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. That absolutely reminds me, let's do this right on stream so that we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Remind me to buy a large wig cap. There. Because that's the thing that I got to do. I have never had a wig cap that's properly sized for my head, so when I wear a wig cap, it just presses on my head, and I develop incredible headaches as a result. So there. Now I'm reminded so that the next time I want to wear a wig, I can do that. The sleeveless Ray. Yeah, exactly, Liz. Exactly. Cassie Mouse points out, I would be worried about playing a GM PC because I would know a lot of stuff my PC shouldn't know. Yeah, and that is absolutely something else to keep in mind. My group tends to like to collect NPCs and kind of put them in their group. So I just have to make sure that I do so in such a way that they're able to interact with these NPCs and enjoy having them around without focusing on them too hard, without making them full characters and making people able to enjoy those characters, but also not being like, okay, well, then these characters are going to be their equals in combat. When combat breaks out, they're going to also take just as much time as a PC does to take their turn. It's not enough, right? If I made Siantel and Flavienne, who are PCs that they've kind of collected in Exaltwitch Academy, if they took as much time to do their turns as all the other PCs did, combat would take much longer because that's 2 added to already 3 PCs. It would be too much. So I have to scale them back somewhat. So it is a thing to keep in mind. Mentioned this briefly before, worth mentioning again, just because it's something that I want new GMs to know. You're the referee. You don't have to know everything, but it is important that you're the one who can, at the end of the day, say, this is what's happening, and move on from there. Your players are totally going to know things that you don't, or remember things that you forget. They may bring up rules that are in the book that you ignored or that you forgot about. All of this is fine, and you can negotiate with your players. Remember that the golden rule is still there. Rules can be changed, and the storyteller rule, if it looks like somebody's trying to break the system in a way that is not intended, then you can have that not work. But you have the right to ask for help. You also can you can totally say, yep, you're right, you're absolutely correct, so we'll go with that. But in the end, one of your duties or responsibilities as a game master is that you're the one who has to make the final call. So be prepared for that. And even if your players are more experienced than you are, it is still your call. You're totally allowed to say, look, we're going to play it this way, and then at the end of the session, we can talk about it, or between sessions, we can talk about it, or whatever. But that is something that is part of role-playing, is the GM makes the call so that we can move on. That is one of the things that you're going to have to do. And do not be intimidated by other players knowing more than you about the game. In the end, it's your call, and you're going to make the call that's best for the game itself. So Cassie asks, oops. That's Requiem saying, in my own experience, is that only really experienced GM/STs can properly pull off a GM PC, not endorsing it, but just saying in general, I still would rather they be avoided. It's something that I would tend to recommend to avoid, but I also tend to want to provide NPCs that players want to keep around and talk to and interact with a lot. That is not the same thing as a GM PC. A GM PC is really like, I play as if I'm a player in this game, but I am also the GM. And that's what I believe should mostly be avoided. Cassie Mouse asks, I am curious, did you stat up Siantel, etc. as full characters or quick characters? I don't think I ever did anything but quick characters. I don't. So I'll answer this. I will say that sometimes I will not answer these questions, or I will lie, because for instance, if I have to stat out a character entirely, but I don't want somebody to know that that character is that important just yet, I don't always feel comfortable answering it, but I can tell you this. Siantel and Flavienne were originally quick characters only. I will not say whether they are more than that at this point, because I don't really want to reveal everything about my NPCs, but oftentimes I tend to not make full characters because I don't want to spend the time on them, knowing that my players may take 2 glances at them and then never consult with them again. Remember, it was my players who decided to go after those characters. I didn't take them and gather them up and put them down and say, these are the characters that you're going to have to interact with from now on. Aresta went after them. So I didn't know whether they would become more important or not, or even if I intended for them to become more important, I didn't know whether I'd need a full character sheet for them, because often you don't need a full character sheet for them at all. I'm also at the point where I can gauge a character's power level and just assign them a stat when I need them to. If it's something like, hey, I wonder whether Flavienne can, what her base kind of perception awareness roll is, I can sort of just gauge it and be like, it's 5. It's not great, but it's not terrible. And I also don't really care, and this is sacrilegious to some people, I don't really care if I say that one session it's 5 and then the next session I forget that I made it 5 and I make it 4 or 6 instead. I really don't care. It's not that important. Not for an NPC. If it becomes important, then I will make it important. I will stat the sheet out fully. But otherwise, it's just not that important to be that accurate all the time. So a very good thing to bring up. Can you explain safety tools for a new GM? Thanks, Tuxander. I totally can. If you are a new GM, you should be using safety tools, because if you are a GM, you should be using safety tools. And the safety tools that you use can be up to you. There are many different ones out there. The most basic ones are things that you do when you discuss the game before you start playing. Things like lines and veils. Lines and veils at its core are asking a player what they are not comfortable with experiencing in a game. A veil is something that they're comfortable existing in a game, but they don't want any focus on. So in other words, it's behind a veil. So you can say, I put torture as a veil because while it's okay if you want to torture my character, I don't want to role play out that torture. That would be too intense for me. Cool. That's a veil. Something that can exist, but we don't put a spotlight on it. And a line is something that you do not want in the game at all. A line could be like, for instance, for me, a line in most of my games, in fact, pretty much all of my games, is sexual assault. Not that interested in it, or at least violent sexual assault, I'll say, because, there are different people. Somebody could say like, if my husband betrays me, then I retroactively revoke all consent, and therefore it's sexual assault. And I'm not going to get into all permutations of it, but violent sexual assault doesn't happen in my games. I don't want it to happen in my games. I have absolutely no interest in seeing it. It is a line for me, a line that I will not cross, even if it's off camera. I don't want to have characters mention that they are engaged in things like sexual assault. So it just doesn't happen. I don't do it. These are things that you should be doing with your players. Lines and veils are one of the most basic tools. I recommend them for basically anybody. But there's plenty of ones that you can do. There's the cards. Let me just grab them because they're now over here. Because we're moving the stream space so that it's actually in this office. So now the stuff is here. So we use safety cards here. In our games, we always use safety cards now, and we also talk about the safety cards before each game. I recommend that as a practice because just like a fire extinguisher, if you don't know where the fire extinguisher is, it doesn't do you any good. The green card is essentially saying, I'm really great with what's happening right now. Even if it looks like I'm not, I am totally having fun. I am enthusiastically consenting to this. We can even push further if we need to or want to. This is especially useful if you have Kate in your game because Kate emotes quite well, but sometimes it's hard to tell whether she's being serious or not, and so she can fling this out, and therefore we know. The yellow card is an indicator that I need everybody at the table to stop for a second and pay attention to me. I have something very important to say. This could be something like, I'm reminding people that I have a line or a veil, and I just want to make sure that people remember. It could be, hey, so this scene is getting kind of intense. Can we ease back a little bit on its intensity? It could be, this scene is getting intense and that's fine, but I don't want it to get more intense than this. A yellow card is a way for people to basically make sure that everybody at the table is aware of something. A red card means stop. It means stop right away. I'm not okay. The game stops, and then only when the person who's flashed the red card says it's okay can the game continue. It is a very important thing that when you show any of these cards, you never have to justify your use of it. You may have to. Now, justifying isn't the same as explaining. So if I flash a red card and I'm like, okay, we have to stop, it's okay to ask, like, what is it that we need to change? What's wrong? What isn't okay is to sort of be like, well, you know, I said that I didn't really want to have smoking in the game, and I don't want smoking because when I was a kid, I was burned by a cigarette, and ever since then, I've never been able to look at a cigarette without feeling uncomfortable. You don't have to explain anything or justify anything, but you may have to be able to say, like, this is what I'm not comfortable with. Obviously, if you're not comfortable talking about it in the moment, that's fine, but the game can't continue until you're okay. Hey, Neophet, I'm very happy to see you. Requiem points out, sometimes I wonder if the cards are as much for our benefit as it is for your group green card specifically. Yes, the safety tools are there for everybody, including the audience. Because one thing that I've learned as a fight choreographer is if the audience feels like the cast is in danger, they aren't going to enjoy it. They're going to be tense. They're going to feel worried. If a fight scene, this is why actors who are like, no, hit me for real. Like, I want it to feel real. First of all, that's just fucking stupid and dangerous, because you risk giving one good performance and then you're put in the hospital and you can't perform ever again. But the other thing is that the audience will actually feel super uncomfortable if it looks uncontrolled or if it looks like somebody actually got hurt, because they get sucked out of the magic of theater and the story, and they start caring about the actor instead. And it's much the same thing with role-playing. If somebody looks like they're suffering, but you don't know that they're okay, sorry, that's wrong card. They don't know that they're okay, then you're not going to enjoy watching it as much. Just so that you know, our actual green card is completely obscured because the green screen behind me makes it disappear. So I have a different shade of green for when I have to show it off in front of a screen. The cards also, it is important to point out, especially for new GM, the cards do not mean that somebody has made a mistake or that somebody has done something wrong. It is possible to accidentally trip on somebody's line or veil. It happens. It should not be seen as a deliberate attempt to make somebody upset or poor. Now, if it happens all the time, if somebody is just constantly breaking somebody's lines or veils, then yeah, that's an issue. But it'll happen occasionally because you can't necessarily be expected to remember everything, and that's fine. But sometimes you're going to come across something and you had no reason to suspect that somebody else might not be okay with it, and then suddenly they realize that it's a problem. The other thing to remember is that consent is the sort of thing that you can give or revoke at any time. And just because you were okay with something 5 minutes ago doesn't mean that you're okay with it now. I am somebody who does not experience arachnophobia. You can talk about spiders all day around me and I'm not going to care. But then if I'm like, okay, now I don't really like spiders, it's not an excuse to then say, well, 5 minutes ago you were okay with it and now you're not. Like, what the fuck? Things change. So it is important to realize that just because somebody has flashed a card doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. It means that they're telling you that something needs to be paid attention to so that you can make that change and move forward to keep everybody happy. So that is the basis of the safety cards that we use. There are plenty of other safety tools out there. There's the X card, which is basically a card with an X on the table, and if somebody's uncomfortable, they touch that card. And if somebody's touching that card, it means what just happened is immediately revoked, and you do something else instead. Look up safety tools and figure out the ones that you want to use, but use safety tools in your games. Always. Even if you think, oh, it's just a quick one shot, it's no big deal. Having a 30-second conversation at the beginning of the session being like, hey, so is there anything that I should avoid in this game? Cool. That's a safety tool. That's more than enough. if that's what you feel like you need. I recommend the safety cards just because it's something that we can now always use, and it's easy for us to just say, yep, here they are, and then we just know what they are. I don't believe we've ever had a red card pulled on stream. We've had a few yellows, and those yellows were always important for us to remember, but they did not detract from our enjoyment of the game. So that happens. Requiem saying that safety and consent is sexy, yo, is completely true. It's also fun. It is important to remember that when we play with safety cards, it's because we want to be able to push boundaries. We want to be able to step outside of our normal daily lives. And I wouldn't feel comfortable edging into that comfort zone if I didn't know that somebody had a way to pull me out of it if I needed to. Even something as simple as like, oh, so your character is attracted to one of my NPCs? Well, we all giggle about that, and we all might have a lot of fun, playing up the ships and stuff like that. But I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it unless somebody had a way to sort of be like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, because it's also incredibly easy for a GM to abuse their position to manipulate somebody in a sexual fashion. Saying things like, oh, I was just doing it in character, or even just like, yeah, a real role player would role play out a relationship like this. Are you a real role player? Like, it's incredibly easy to abuse that. It's even incredibly easy to abuse it without meaning to, in a lot of ways, because you are in a position of power and the other person is not. And if you do not recognize that they're uncomfortable, because sometimes it's not possible to, then, that's an issue. But safety cards help you and other people avoid those situations. So it's a lot easier to roleplay in those circumstances. So that's what safety tools are for new GMs. Totally keep that in mind. And one last thing that I had as a note for a new GM to keep in mind, something that I've been harping on a lot recently on this channel, but still an important thing to bring up for new GMs, is that it is your job to make everybody at the table happy, but that's everybody's job at the table. Yes, you have a responsibility to make sure that the story has a good foundation, and it's your job to make all the other players feel really good and feel awesome and have the spotlight put on them. That is your job. But it is your job to basically make sure that everybody's having fun. And it's the player's job too. And it's something that I kind of want everybody to know, because I don't think enough has been said about that. When you sit down at a table, yes, you should make sure that you are having fun. Advocate for yourself. Say what you would like to see in the game. Make sure that you are comfortable, but also try to see what you can do to make sure that everybody else is having fun. And I guarantee you that you are going to have fun, more fun, if you're surrounded by everybody smiling as opposed to just you. And as a player, it is your responsibility also to make sure that the GM is having fun. Causing problems for the GM is not a good way to go about making sure that everybody at the table is having fun. So it is something to keep in mind. Requiem saying a real role player would roleplay that sounds a lot like victim blaming, and that is outright not acceptable by any metric. It's a terrible sentence. I don't feel comfortable uttering it, but I have heard it before. And I have even been guilty of saying that to myself in the past. Like, yeah, I would do this. I should do this, because that would, like, if I'm as good a role player as I think that I am, then I should be comfortable doing that and talking myself into doing something that I maybe shouldn't have done. I've told a bunch of these stories in the past, but yeah, it is a thing. As a GM, don't forget that you are responsible for everybody's happiness, which means that you're also looking out for problematic behavior. But remember that should be what you're looking out for all the time, whether you're a player or a GM. That is what you should be doing. You should be trying to make sure that everybody's having a good time. So in that case, don't feel that this is an added responsibility for you as a GM. It's a responsibility for you whether you're a GM or a player. So if it's not a responsibility that you're willing to have, you probably shouldn't be engaged in group activities. which is also kind of a harsh thing to say, but you know, there it is. Does anybody out there, does anybody out there have any other questions or comments about new GMs, or even anything about role-playing? We've got about 20 minutes left, so if we can sort of dovetail onto other conversations as well. But what do you think? What are things that, have I said anything that you disagree with? Because honestly, I'd love to hear that. It is totally fine to disagree with me. And I don't want to make it seem, like I said at the very beginning of the show, what I say are my opinions, and my opinions are not gospel truth. So please feel comfortable to toss in where you might believe that I have made a mistake, or that you just may not agree with me, because that is one of the essential things about a dialogue, about a conversation. Neophet says, this is a good GM tip for anybody. I think it's important to talk to your players after the game to check in and ask for feedback. So, checking in with your players, absolutely important. Asking for feedback, I would do that. Just remember that not everybody is very good at giving feedback. So it's possible that you're going to get people saying like, oh, you did a good job, and then they go away and they complain about you behind your back. It'll happen. You might get people who just become overly critical, even though they had an amazing time, because they're like, oh, they're looking for feedback, so I'm going to say every little individual thing that I absolutely hated without realizing how it's going to come across. So just be aware, not everybody knows how to do feedback well. But yeah, checking in with your players. Hey, did you have a good time? Is there anything that you would like to see? Is there something that you would want to suggest for next session? Is there something that that you wanted to bring up in the session but felt like you couldn't? Or if there's something that you wanted to bring up but just forgot? Totally fine. Because as Neophet says, you may find out that there was an issue in the game you may have missed and learn from them. Which is true. Absolutely. Requiem Law says, I would say that it is all right if you don't have any lines or veils. Does not make you a bad person, but you still have to abide by other players' lines and veils. So this is a basic safety tool tip. Yes, if you don't have any lines or veils, that doesn't mean that other people have to meet your exacting qualifications. It's also, you aren't better than somebody else because you don't have a line or a veil. Part of the reason why I have sexual assault in my lines is because I just don't find it very interesting to play. Like, I don't want to see it. So that's part of the reason why it's there, because I don't want it. Doesn't mean that I'm a worse role player than you because there's something that I just don't want to see. It's just, no. A line could be as simple as being like, I don't want to deal with people talking in an Italian accent. Now, I would point out that, like, saying I don't want to hear people talk in an Italian accent when you have somebody who's Italian at your table, or somebody who naturally talks in an Italian accent, that would be pretty rude. But it might be that you have that line because you're like, whenever I hear somebody do an Italian accent, it draws me out of the game because I notice all the mistakes and I don't want to deal with that. So I'd prefer that to be a line. Like, you can do that. That's a line. That's less of a safety issue and more of a preference thing, but like, it is something that you can mention. But you also don't know why somebody has said something in a line or a veil, and it's often not necessarily appropriate to ask. I have mentioned, I will mention this as a trigger warning for sexual assault for people. So I will give you, when I put my hands back down, I will stop talking about it. But I have been the victim of sexual assault in the past. I don't like dealing. Sorry, it's not that I don't like dealing with it. It's that I don't want to put that in a game because it's not a topic that I feel like I want to have in my game. So I don't. But I don't have to have been a victim of sexual assault to want that as in one of my lines. I don't at all. I also, even if I was a victim, that doesn't mean that tomorrow I may not decide that I want to put that in one of my games. Obviously I wouldn't if everybody wasn't cool with it. But the trick is that asking me why I don't want something in a game might bring up something you don't want to know, or might bring up something that I don't really want to get into. So it's why you don't ask people to justify their line surveils. Okay, so that's the end of that. If you are worried about that content, I've put it aside for now. So Aragorn has said, if you have a long-running campaign, it can also help to do a session 0 to have some of the expectations and safety conversations again, completely. As a new GM, session 0s are still something that you should look into, and we've discussed those in the past. Cassie asks, how can you keep a group of players together in a sandbox game? I had a lot of trouble with this when I first tried to run Exalted. If you watch my games, my players split up all the fucking time. How do you keep them together? There's a couple of ways that you can do it. One of the ways is meta gaming it. Tell your players, please don't split up. You can do that. It might not feel as good to do it that way, but you can do it. It's totally fine. The second thing that you can do is what Real Rick Wall said, which is you can just tell your players, please find a reason for your characters to stay together as a party. I have enough to do here. Completely legitimate. One of the things that I tend to do when I ask people to make characters, I say, why would your character want to run in this party? And why is this party something that your character would like to stay together in? Because if they're not, I also warn players, if your character decides that they no longer want to travel with the other PCs for a significant period of time, I will consider that as if your character is lost to death or whatever, and you'll have to make a new character so that you can rejoin, or that'll signify the end of the campaign. Thankfully, I don't end up needing to do that ever. My players are pretty good about that sort of thing, so I don't have to worry, but it is something you can tell your players, just like, look, you're gonna have to find a reason for all these people to want to stick together. Because remember, you'll have players who want to copy fiction tropes like the loner character, not realizing that those don't work as well in role-playing games because they're part of a tightly scripted, paced narrative with one controller as opposed to 4 or 5, where it is not tightly, strictly paced. So there is that. One of the other things that I could do is that if you're worried that people keep kind of separating, is make sure that they understand that if they separate, things go badly for them. Use the carrot and stick approach. So the carrot and stick, so it's not a great visual, but the carrot and the stick is essentially that if you want somebody to do something, you give them a carrot, you give them a treat. So if they do something that you like, you're like, great, and you give them a treat. So if your characters stay together as a group, you give them a reward for that. But if they do something that you don't like, you punish them for it, the stick. So if you have a player who wanders off on their own and they're like, oh, I'm just going to go off my own, it'll just take a sec. That's when you ambush that player. Let them escape and run back to the safety of the group. But basically say, if you do things that involve you separating from the group, bad things happen. And they'll learn to stay together. Or they'll learn that if they have to separate, then they're going to have to prepare for it and work together, even if they're not necessarily physically going to be in the same place. So deal with it out of character. Make sure that you tell your players, look, find a reason to stick together, but also carrot and stick. Reward them for doing things that you like, punish them for doing things that you don't. And this is kind of the same for anything in a game. It's kind of a very mercenary way of looking at it, but it often can work out. It's often true. If somebody gets a reward, they're more likely to repeat a behavior. And if somebody gets punished, they're less likely to repeat a behavior. So there is something to consider there. Requiem says, something I adapted from the army that I love to do after stories is an after action report. Basically 3 things that went well, 3 things that went poorly, and how it can be improved. Absolutely, if that works out for you. What I do at the end of games is I ask players what they learned. It is an open secret that when I ask this question, part of it is because I want to see what they noticed and because I want them to talk about the game. A lot of it is I'm just gauging their emotional reactions by having them talk about the game after the fact. And the number one thing that I'm looking for is that if somebody can't answer that question, it means that there's something that's gone wrong. It could mean that either the player checked out, so they're just like, I don't know. and I don't know, I wasn't really paying attention, in which case, oh, that player wasn't paying attention. Or if somebody refuses to answer, it's probably because they're not in a good emotional state. So it's kind of, while I am interested in the answer to the question, I do care. And most of its usefulness comes from gauging people's emotional state. So there is that. But I often find that asking them for one thing that they learned, they start agonizing over it and start thinking like, fuck, I have to say something good. And I'm like, I don't care about what you say. I care about how you say it. I care about why you're doing it. So maybe asking for 3 things, depending on your group, might not be great, because then they might start worrying about coming up with 3 unique things each. And that becomes a bigger stressor than anything else. But maybe your group wants to be able to have long conversations like that. So go for it. It's also a good debriefing to get them out of character, says Kung Fu Fenris. And this is, again, the magic circle. I try to have my players enter the magic circle to realize, okay, it's time for game. I don't mind if there's out of character things that happen in game. In fact, I kind of encourage it, because that's sort of where a lot of the fun lies. But I do want people to realize, okay, now's the time for game. And equally, now's the time to end game. And the reason why that's important is that if you don't do that, you'll sometimes have people be like, oh, but I wanted to do one more thing. Oh, but I wanted to do this one more action. I wanted to talk to this NPC. And instead of being able to say, that was a fun session, they're annoyed that the session is over, and they keep trying to extend it. Even into the next few days, they're like, I still want to do this. I still want to do that. Help me. Can we run a side session? Can we do this? But being able to say the session is done and helping them transition away from the session is really helpful to getting them get that kind of closure on the session, so that then they can take a break, take a breath, and then approach things from a more neutral emotional response. Saying things like, I would like a side session, is way better than, I need a side session now! And you'll get that more if you have them exit the magic circle properly. To have them know not just that the session is over, but to transition them out of it. This is often also a form of aftercare. If somebody had an emotional experience while playing a game, transitioning them out of that emotional experience can make it so that it not only felt great during the session, but then they'll still have good memories of it afterwards. I've had players bawl at the table and afterwards be like, that was amazing. I felt so good. Like, sometimes it feels really good to cry, or it feels really good to care about something that deeply and to have that kind of emotional reaction. But if somebody starts crying and then you're like, great, and then you get up and you walk away from the table, and you just leave them there sobbing, it's not going to feel great. So aftercare is also important. And that is one of the things that you can do at the end of a session to help transition people out of it. Requiem, I do it at the end of every session. I don't just do it at the end of stories. I do it at the end of every session, because I think that's part of my transition out of the magic circle. So Cassie says, I know I tend to be pretty quiet in a game unless I prepare a lot beforehand. I got a little better at improv over time, but I usually have to sit there and think quietly for a few seconds first. Totally okay. And that is also something that I point out to a new GM. Different players will react in different ways to the game, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're having different levels of enjoyment. Somebody who remained quiet throughout the entire session might come out afterwards and be like, that was amazing. Because what they were looking for was to be entertained with a good story and not to be called upon. Some people might say, you were shouting the entire game, and you're like, yeah, because I was into it and I had a lot of fun. But then you might also have somebody who was like laughing and joking and at the end being like, good game, everybody, and then gets up and leaves and then goes home and absolutely destroys themselves over how they played in the game. Reactions are not always easy to read. There are different people who have more difficulty reading reactions, which is something that you should be aware of, but anybody can miss things. Remember that also, I have the privilege of playing with professional actors. And if there's one thing that a professional actor can do, if they're good, is trick me into thinking that they're feeling something that they're not. I have absolutely no doubt that if Liz or Scott wanted to, they could very easily make me believe that they were in a different emotional state than they were. I'm not saying that Kate couldn't either, but like, it's literally something that they trained to do. I know that they trained to do it. I was there when they were training for it. I was in the same classes. I was watching them do it. I've seen them do it throughout their professional lives. They're very good at it. But normal humans can be good at it too. So just be careful. Just because you think how somebody reacted doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And different people have different ways of expressing that kind of reaction. I'm lucky in that my players at this point, I trust them to be able to tell me if they are not pleased or not happy with things. But I still get moments where I will run a game and I will be convinced that people think one way, and then I find out that they think another afterwards. But the reason why I find out afterwards is A, I proactively go and ask them how they're doing and I check in, and B, I create an environment where I feel, or I hope that I create an environment where players feel comfortable coming to me and talking to me about how things went. Because that's kind of the way that you get the truth, is by developing those bonds of trust. And if anytime somebody had a complaint about the game, I just constantly defended myself and tried to sort of say like, well, you're wrong, then I don't think they'd come to me any longer. But if when they come to me with complaints or with concerns, I listen to them, I ask them about them, I find out more about them, I suggest ways that we might be able to improve things for next time. These are ways in which players develop that trust, so that then they can keep coming back. So that helps. So hate type, make your players cry and then spit on them, assert dominance. See, I'm not putting that up on the screen. No. I love making my players cry if they want to cry. That's great. I'm super down for that. But I don't want to spit on anybody unless they want to be spat upon. Consent, yo. Super good. Requiem Law says, in my experience, nothing builds trust quicker in a group than when you admit you were wrong. That's great. It definitely helps to build trust. One of the things that I would point out, though, is that there is a big difference between admitting that you're wrong and talking about how you were wrong. It's sort of like apologies, right? Saying, I'm sorry you feel that way is a lot different than saying, I'm sorry I did this thing. A proper apology involves you acknowledging what you did wrong, acknowledging that it happened, and then making a commitment about that thing. So it is today's topic is right up there. It's about new GMs. So saying I'm sorry isn't enough. Saying I'm sorry that this happened, I acknowledge that it caused this, this, and this, and here's what I want to do in the future, is like the first step towards a better apology. But in much the same way, if you say, I was wrong, that might help get people on your side. But there's also, you can be like, oh, I was wrong. Like, I can't believe it. That game really sucked. I know all of you had such a bad time. Because then what you're probably doing at that point, what I've seen a lot of people do, is they start saying these things because they're fishing for compliments. Or they're trying to get ahead of criticism by basically being like, you can't criticize me because no one can criticize me more than I criticize myself. Neither of these behaviors are all that helpful. So admitting that you're wrong, saying this is what I did that was wrong, here's what I think I could do better, or this is what I did that I was wrong, what do you have to say about it? Do you have any way to react to it? Do you have any suggestions on what might be done better? Those are ways that you can engender trust. So Requiem, you're absolutely correct. I'm just making sure that people understand that they're the behavior that I've seen where somebody is just like, well, I suck, I guess. And I guess I was wrong about that. I got that rule wrong. So fuck it. Like, you're not helping anybody at that point. You're performing for yourself, and that's it. Well, it is 7:00, which means that the clinic is closing, but it doesn't mean that you aren't without things that you can do. Tomorrow, we have Elizabeth A. Neal on her channel twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal. She'll be playing Punch Club, which is honestly a classic punchy game. Totally worth watching. I am really looking forward to seeing more of that as we keep going with this. On Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will have our rewatch for Exaltridge Academy Episode 9. So come on in. It'll be a lot of fun. People basically come in and they chat while we replay the session here on Twitch. Fantastic if you can't stay awake during game, or if it's just not convenient for you, come on in and have a look. At 3 o'clock will be Drew Crew with Elizabeth at her channel. Her and Scott reading aloud from a Nancy Drew mystery. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll probably be Doomed with Scott. Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, will be right here, Exaltridge Academy Episode 10. I made a promise, so I guess I'm going to have to live up to it. So it would be a good thing for you to tune on in, because I think that it will be interesting to see what happens. In the meantime, I'm going to throw out just one quick shout out. If you're interested in watching somebody do a super chill stream, super creative stream, and watching somebody do magic with yarn, you should be tuning into Dio the Yarn Dragon. Go and drop a follow over there. Some fantastic stuff going on that channel. I can't always chat because I'm usually working when Dio is streaming, but I always enjoy just having it on the screen so that I can see Cecil, the cat, screw with the camera, and so that I can just see some awesome stuff being made. But when I can chat, it's also a lot of fun. It's a great stream to go into. So please go and have a look if you can. I didn't open the bot. Yeah, I suck. I'm bad. But yeah, if you come back, this clinic runs Thursdays, 5 p.m. Eastern time, right here. And hey, if you've got a comment, or if you've got a question, or if you've got a suggestion for a topic that we can cover in the future, please do so. Do it on the Discord. Discord is the best place to do it. The link is below. Or you can follow us on Twitter. Look, we're all just things RPG. So have a look there too. Oh yeah. Dio's got Chaos Cats. Multiple Chaos Cats. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Always fun. I really appreciate it. And just remember, look, if there's anything that you can take away from this, it's that if you can communicate, it helps. Using your word hole is an awesome thing to do. We'll see you next time.